Well, hello and good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Lila Jones, and I lead one of the fastest growing divisions in Google Cloud here in North Central with a team of great people. And I also co-lead our Women at Google Chicago chapter. Today, I am so thrilled to be able to host an amazing speaker, an amazing person, an amazing CEO, Indra Nooyi.
Lila, great to see you.
It's wonderful to see you as well. When I think about your amazing credentials, you've been one of the most loved CEOs. You've been the first woman trailblazer to hold a CEO position in a Fortune 50 company. You've won tons of awards for all of the work that you've done in society and in business. And I can't tell you how many people look up to you and see you as just a beacon of hope for all of us still building our careers. So welcome. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for being with us.
Lila, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to talk with you. It's a privilege to talk with you. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So we started talking about this because of this amazing new book you have, amazing new book that talks about your life, your work, families, and the future. It talks about, and I won't give away too much of it, but it really talks about being able to connect some of the links between work, family, and career. And I love one of the things that you said in the book that talks about this not being a memoir for you, but really being a manual for the rest of us who are out here working to build our careers, taking care of young children, taking care of older, aging, elderly parents, and also trying to make a difference in our society and communities. So this talk is really about what inspired you to write that and some of the background that helped you put your thoughts together to make this amazing book.
That's a great question, Lila. In fact, goes back to the opening comments that you made. You talked about being a role model, people looking up to me, and the fact that you accomplish a lot in your life. At least in retrospect, you feel like you've lived a good life in terms of professional, having the family. But living a good life doesn't mean you just abandon everything after you retire, because life is well beyond your time as a CEO. The real question is, how can you continue to make positive change in the world and in society? And in my case, I decided that I would lean in to make positive change in two areas. One, I noticed that a lot of young women in managerial ranks came into the workforce in large numbers and dropped out in the second or third level because they just couldn't figure out how to make motherhood and rising in the corporate world possible. Because the corporate world is a pyramid. I mean, it's a steep pyramid. And if you sort of take a detour or you drop out, it's very hard to come back. So, first, we need to figure out how to make more of them ascend to the top, because women are basically wicked smart and they're very talented, and they should be deployed in all of the productive jobs that will help the economy. So that's one challenge. The other challenge, I think, is even more emotionally difficult to come to terms with, because I'm surprised we haven't done much about it. When we talked about the pandemic and all that happened during that time, there were a whole group of workers who couldn't work flexibly. Our teachers, our hospital caregivers, our senior citizen caregivers in retail and hospitality, they all had to go to work every day. And many of them, with schools closed, didn't know what to do about childcare or senior care. And many of them had to go into work and stay away for 2 or 3 weeks for quarantine reasons. And so, if you look at all of our frontline workers across the economy, they are the people that keep the wheels of the economy going. And if you look at a lot of those jobs, like caregiving jobs, they're all skewed towards women. And they don't have good childcare facilities. Either they're not affordable, they're not available, or the quality is not very good. So here I was confronting two problems, which are very, well known to all of us. At the managerial level, how do you provide a support system to move women up the ladder?
Mhm.
But in the front line, how do you just allow young family builders and women in particular just do the work that they want to do in order to support their families, but they also helps the economy? And I think we have to stop talking about this issue as being their problem. I think it's now our collective challenge to address. And so it's these twin challenges that caused me to write the book. And people said, if you just wrote a paper on this, nobody will read it and it won't have stickiness. Can you inform it with the arc of your life? So the arc of my life informs a lot of the managerial issues that women face. And then my co-chairmanship of Reopen Connecticut brought home to life the whole frontline worker, the essential workers' plight. And putting the two together, I realized the problems and the solutions are the same. It's how we address it that's going to be the big challenge going forward.
That's fantastic. I recall reading about some of the work that you were doing to reopen Connecticut and the framework that you were working to put in place with a team. That's awesome. Now, it's interesting as I listen to you communicate. You are a wonderful presenter, of course. And one of the challenges that women often have, and maybe not just women, all people have, is speaking up and using their voice and the way that they communicate and being able to share their ideas. And I recall reading in the book that you were always a part of the debate team. You always spoke up. You spoke politics in the men's salon and inside of your house, in the men's living room inside of your house. And so I'm curious to know what feedback you would give or what advice you have for people on clearly communicating and sharing their ideas in a way that matters.
Very important skill. I think communication skills, both oral and written, but let's stay with the oral communication skills. If you have good oral communication skills, can actually get you very far. But let me be clear what I mean by good oral communication skills. It's not reading a speech. A lot of people can do that. It's not looking at a teleprompter and just reading. Many people can do that too. The issue is when you read it, how do you make the words go into somebody's emotion as opposed to somebody's ears? How do you deliver the speech so people know it's your speech as opposed to you reading somebody else's speech? And more importantly, when you speak without a speech in front of you, Lila, the person who's listening to you should be able to form a picture in their head of what you're talking about. So even the most complex subjects, break it down into its component pieces and deliver it so that people can form a picture in their minds right away. And that's a skill that's teachable, that's trainable, that's practicable, if you want to call it that. But I think that we have to equip people with that capability because as you become a leader, as you ascend, you have to constantly mobilize your troops to come along with you. And you can't always pick up a piece of paper and read from it. And you can't always just repeat what you're saying and expect to get the same result if it hasn't gotten the result so far. So at every point in time, you have to tune the speech to the audience. You have to create vivid pictures in their mind and constantly let these pictures evolve so it goes from the mind, from the head to the heart. And that's the skill that, we all have to teach people. And it comes with watching great speakers. One of the greatest speakers I've ever heard was Vernon Jordan. Vernon Jordan, when he spoke, knew which line to emphasize a second or a third time. And he knew which part of the audience to look at and emphasize a line. He knew when to slow down, when to pick up. He had the gift of speaking. And, we should encourage people to listen to Vernon Jordan's speeches. Bill Clinton is another great speaker who can take a simple subject, make it too complex, and then simplify it again. But he'll create a picture in your head. So if you look at some of these great speakers and listen to them, I think we can all get better at this particular skill, critical skill to move ahead.
I love that you mentioned that. As somebody who trains and engages with salespeople often, I'm always talking about don't just focus on the products and the services. What's the why? What's the story? How does that touch people? So I really appreciate you underscoring that. I noticed also that in reading the book and looking at your story, right, you were one of the first women of color in a Fortune 50 company. You were an only. And I think about the passage in your book where you talked about when you were interviewing, I believe it was at Yale, and you didn't have the right clothes or you didn't have the right outfits and how people didn't necessarily receive you like they received others. It would be great to learn more about that experience.
I want to first put this whole thing in the right timing. It's 1978, 79. This is a long, long, long time ago. And there weren't that many international students in many universities here. And there was certainly no women, colored women coming from emerging markets to study here. So these are very, very early days. So there wasn't an infrastructure built to provide support to people like me who came with no idea of how to dress, how to behave, how to interact. I mean, just had no knowledge. So um, you sort of sink or swim. You learn to just watch others and get better as you went along. And my first summer job interview at Yale, I just didn't know what to wear. I had saris and I had some awful jeans and tops. Clearly couldn't wear either to the interview. So I went to Kresge's, which is the Kmart equivalent on Chapel Street in New Haven, and bought myself an outfit which cost less than $50 because that's all I had, which I was very proud of. But when I wore it, it looked pretty bad on me. And people laughed at me when I walked into the career office. But it was too late because I had an interview and I needed the job because I have to support myself in the summer. So I walked in and gave the interview with great confidence, but feeling terrible inside because I knew that I looked like a disaster. Then I came out and spoke to the career office who said, "Yeah, you look pretty bad. So your next interview, because we were all sure I wouldn't get this job, your next interview, wear a sari because that's all you have. And if people don't hire you for who you are, it's their loss." So the next day, I wore a sari to a consulting interview and I got the job. But what was ironic, Lila, is this job that I interviewed for day one with this lousy outfit, they too offered me one of the two jobs that they offered that day. So I realized that I'd come to a country where people were more interested in what you had to say as opposed to how you looked or how you acted. So I had a positive experience because people viewed me and said, "Boy, she might actually have something to contribute."
That
And
is fantastic.
they looked beyond that absolutely ghastly outfit.
Many of us have had nowhere near that experience, but showing up in the wrong thing. So I think we can really relate to
Yes.
that awkward feeling. So, I mean, when you think about all that you've accomplished and you think about rising to the top of PepsiCo, something that you mentioned that when you took the role, that wasn't even necessarily your goal. I think it was the fact that it was 15 minutes from your house and you had a 10-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Uh-huh.
And the other offer that you had was a half an hour away. So you
Yep.
took the PepsiCo role. I'm curious to know, what do you credit to your rise there? What do you credit to the success that you had there?
I think it's two things. One is clearly I had to do my part. I worked my tail off. And I mentioned in the book that I always had this immigrant fear. And I walk into a room and I say, "God, I'm so different. Nobody else like me." Therefore, people must be asking themselves the question, why is she at this table? Why is she in this room? Why is she giving us advice? Or why is she working on the project? I just had that complex in me, all right? So I would dig myself into a hole and then I would have to find a way to come out of the hole. And I knew the only way I could do it is by showing that I was on top of the material, I'd prepared everything, and I knew more about what needed to get done than anybody in the room. So I had to do it with sheer grit and knowledge and depth of expertise. Okay, that's all I had to focus on. So that's all I did. I focused on the knowledge base, on competence, on thinking about the issue at the detail level and at a higher level. So I was zooming in and zooming out of every issue. And so I came to the table with those skills. And after a while, people looked past, just like that interview we talked about, looked past who I was, my background or how I looked or talked or whatever, and said, "Man, here's somebody who actually has some great points to make." I mean, there were some uncomfortable moments. I'd say I wouldn't say that everything was a smooth sailing, but on balance, I'd say people said, "If she's so well prepared and knows her stuff, why not lean in and listen to her?" So it went from who is she to maybe she belongs here to, boy, we better listen to her. So it went to that, and pretty soon I was invited to most meetings, even if the meeting didn't really relate to my area of work. People would just invite me and say, "Just have Indra come sit. Who knows? She may have a point of view." So I earned a place there. That was one side. The other side was the CEOs and the senior executives that I worked with um, gave me support. They would say, "What does Indra have to say on this topic?" Or make sure you run this by Indra before you bring it to me. And so, by explicitly saying that, they were messaging the senior executives that if you came and told me that Indra's approved it or not approved it, you ran it by her and she was comfortable with it, it's easier for you to get an approval from me. So they were giving me an indirect boost. So I think this combination, actually, I earned it, Lila. I want to be clear. I earned it, but they gave me an added boost to what I brought to the table. And they were all men, incidentally, because there were no women. There were no women in senior positions in those days.
It's interesting when you talk about, challenges that you faced and using your voice. I'm
Uh-huh.
curious to know some of the major challenges you tackled and how you went about that. I recall you mentioning as a CEO for 12 years, the amount of pressure that you're under to manage expectations and how you're probably always solving some level of problem. I'm curious to know at your time there, what were some of the toughest things that you had to handle? And then what methodology did you use to be successful at
Well, let's just talk about my CEO tenure, because if we talk about my entire tenure, we could be here the rest of the evening.
that?
In the CEO tenure, when I took over as CEO, let's not forget we had the financial crisis. So here I am, literally a year after I've taken over, we've got collapse of the financial system. The US is going through its crisis, international is growing, and PepsiCo is more of a US company than international. So I have to figure out how to, sort of add to my international portfolio really fast. So I have to get that done. While that's going on, my North American bottling partners are behaving in a little erratic way, so that I have to figure out how to reset the relationship with them. So that's another challenge I'm facing. On top of that, there was a lot of talk about obesity and taxes on our categories. So, in every which way that I turned, there's some crisis that I'm dealing with. But you can't let that get you down, because the whole organization is looking at you to lead the company calmly, with confidence, thoughtfully. So what you do is, exterior wise, you project a very calm, confident image. You can go inside your office and, you know, uh, paddle very, very furiously, which is what I was doing. In those moments, it was tough, because there's so many balls that you've got in the air trying to get all of that done. You hope that you can power the company through so much change, that all your key executives stay with you through this change, because you can't do it yourself. You need them all on your team. So you've got to co-opt them, you've got to engage them head, heart, and hands, make sure they understand your agenda and execute it with you. So those were very difficult times while delivering the quarter. Don't forget. We can't forget the quarter while delivering the quarter. So I remember now that between the time I was CFO, president and CFO and CEO, I delivered 75 quarters of earnings releases. 75 quarters. I was on the call for 75 quarters of earnings release. So, you had to keep that pressure going to deliver the quarter, yet make all of these changes happen. It was not easy, and not easy at all.
That's a lot of quarters, man. I just
Yeah,
I'm like, I
that is a
can't,
lot of quarters.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like, and just the experiences that you had from that. But I'm curious to know, in all of that, what were some of the main lessons that you learned, or what were some of the main things it taught you about leadership in business?
I think the first one is really understand what you're doing, have conviction in what you're doing, and make sure that your board, in particular, as a CEO, you have to make sure your bosses, that's the board, buys into what you're doing, because they're your first line of defense against any action from shareholders. So if your board is bought into you, you know you have some room to get your plan executed. So you have to have clarity of direction, clarity of how you're going to implement it, and you've got to have the board completely bought into what you're doing. At the same time, you've got to sell your program into your senior executives and your, I'd say, top three levels of the company, because at the end of the day, you've got to make it happen through them. Through them. They have to carry your message. They have to make sure the rest of the organization lines up. And so the challenge we have is, in the hours of the day, how do you craft the message, get the board signed up? And you just don't get them signed up once and walk away. You've got to reinforce it regularly with the board, and get your senior executives signed on. But then those that don't, after a while, you say, look, it's time to leave, because you can try with them for a few months, but if they still don't sign on to the program, they've got to be moved out. Otherwise, they become sort of the stumbling blocks in the company. And so, we had to move out some of the people through retirements. But all of this took a lot of time, and you had to do all this while keeping the current business running and keeping a family going. So I'd say that that particular time when we were trying to effect a major change and implement performance with purpose and navigate through the financial crisis and the bottling transactions was perhaps the most difficult time of my professional life, but all in the public eye, because everybody's watching to see, is this woman going to succeed? Not is this CEO, is this woman going to succeed? Is this person of color who's an immigrant going to succeed as the CEO of this Fortune 50 iconic company? So everybody's watching to see when you're going to fail, okay? When you're going to fail. And so it was tough in those days, really tough. And social media doesn't help, because anything you say or do gets amplified in social media. So one had to be very careful navigating through all the crises at that time. But I had a great team around me, Lila. I had a really good team around me.
Indra, from reading the book, I know you come from a background where you really developed a lot of grit, perseverance, and patience. And I won't be a spoiler alert, but I have to imagine that some of that helped prepare you for some of those challenges. But I am going to switch to another topic, and that is that around mentorship. Oftentimes, when I do talks and work with different groups, women in particular are saying, Lila, how do I go about finding a mentor? How do I find a sponsor? Why is it even important? And there's all this angst around that particular process. And if I recall, in one of your first jobs you had in a textile company, the CEO would come to your house, have tea with your parents, and how weird you found that, and how he pushed you to go and do the next thing. And so I'm sure there were other mentor relationships that you had, but I'm curious to know more about them and how you cultivated them.
So, mentors by themselves are not good enough, but if they're supporters and promoters, besides being mentors, it's great. A few observations. Mentors pick you, you can't pick them. They pick you because they see something in you that they like, and they think you're somebody who's going to go places or can go places with just a little push. So they say, hey, I see something in this person. I want to make sure that I advance their interest, because these people can be molded into something much bigger than they are today. So mentors pick you, and then they transition to supporters and promoters. But the very important lesson with mentors, you have to respect them. And if you go to them for advice and they give you advice and you choose not to take it, you've got to go back to them and say, let me tell you why I didn't take your advice. Because if you ignore their advice and do whatever you want to do, they'll never give you advice again. They won't be available for you again. So all the mentors I've had, and I've had mentors or supporters in every job in every part of my life. And till today, they are my lifelong friends. And I have to tell you that all of those people, if I sought them out for any advice, I'd always go back to them and tell them how I took it, or how I modified it, or how I didn't take it. And it's a two-way street. And if you don't treat mentors with respect that they deserve, shame on you. So think hard before you go. Before you identify somebody who you think is your mentor or supporter. They emerge from nowhere.
It's interesting how you really underscore mentors pick you. They pick you. And I think a lot of times people are confused about that. So thank you for giving us that wisdom on how to go about that. So in your career, there had to be pivotal moments that really helped you move to the next level. I'm curious to know, and the audience is curious to know, what were those moments? What were those one or two times or one or two decisions that had the most impact on you being able to rise to the level of success that you've had?
I think that in every job that I was in, I never ever worried about the next job. I focused on the job I had. I mean, just focused on doing the job I had very, very well. I'm thinking back to all the jobs I've had in my life. And by focusing on the job I had and doing a great job with that, people realized that I wasn't interested in promoting myself or looking for the next job or the next job, but I was putting the company before me to say, how can I do my job so well that the company is benefited from it or by it? And I think that made a huge difference, Laila, because there were times when somebody would say, could you take on more responsibility? I mean, for example, the best is when we were doing the Quaker Oats acquisition, when the CEO walked into my office and said, I need you to take on the FTC process to get the approval from the competition authorities. I didn't know anything about FTC, and I'd never been a lawyer, so I didn't know the process. And I kept looking at him saying, I'm too busy. I've got way too much on my plate. I can't do it. And his point was, I need you to do it because I need to have confidence it'll get done. You don't have to do it. There are lawyers who'll do it, but I need you to be the oversight for it. And I thought long and hard and I said, okay, I'll do it. So, in addition to my jobs, I did the oversight of the FTC process and gave him comfort, but I put the company before me. Similarly, when I was transferred to London in 1976, I think it was, no, I joined PepsiCo in 1994, 96. I was transferred to London, and the new CEO said, you're not going to London because I need you in purchase. It was disappointing, but as my husband said, put your company before yourself. If the company needs you in purchase, stay in purchase. So, Laila, I think that if you talk about the big moments in my life, is where I put the company before me. I put the job I was doing ahead of any advancement. Because, look, if you did the job well and advancements don't come, shame on the company. Shame on the company because the company should want people who are highly qualified. Okay. I just focused on the job that needed to get done. The one other thing I did, which I would encourage a lot of people to focus on, when I did a job, I just didn't do the job. I looked at all the connections and linkages of what I was doing to other pieces of work that were going on around me. So I'd say, look, I'm doing this. Can I overlap a little bit with what you're doing so it's easy to transition from my piece to yours, as opposed to let's just touch briefly? I wanted a little bit of overlap to every module. So I'd almost map out how my module was going to fit into a broader tapestry of work that was going on to make sure together we would add value in the company. So again, this all came under this overall umbrella of how is the work I'm doing benefiting the company, as opposed to how do I just do a job? It was how do I add value to the company? How are we making a difference? Um, why is the job I'm doing or the project I'm working on right now important for the company? So it was always that way.
I appreciate you mentioning that if you're doing a great job and your company doesn't notice it, shame on them, right?
Yep.
That's a very important piece of it as well. I know as women, oftentimes we don't advocate for ourselves, and so kind of knowing what the balance there is super important. So thanks for calling that out. You've heard a lot, and all of us have been in lots of conversations lately around diversity and inclusion. And I know that you're a huge supporter of that. You've always talked about how allies can ensure that people aren't being talked over, or if somebody rolls their eyes, kind of waiting and finding out why did you not accept that point of view, and really being tuned into people's engagement. I'd love to learn more about how you might instruct or advise leaders who want to cultivate more in the DEI space.
Diversity and anything to do with just plain diversity is numbers. Do you have diversity? What is diversity? It's a very mathematical thing. Inclusion is a state of mind. So I think if you focus on diversity and don't focus on inclusion and retention and development and promotion, then you really don't have a DEI program. Because what you're trying to do is meet some external critics' desire to meet some numbers, but you're not making the effort to make them fit in, make them feel included in meetings, giving them the kind of stretch assignments you would other people, and helping them get to these goals that you set for them. So I think we all have to practice inclusion in a much more meaningful way, because that's really what makes diversity work. And usually, when you don't practice inclusion, you strip away a diverse person's confidence, which strips away their competence, and as a doom loop begins. So, when we talk about people talking over you or rolling their eyes or ignoring you or not inviting you to meetings, that's all behavior that smacks of, non-inclusiveness. So I think we have to be very, very conscious about that. Now, let's talk about inclusiveness. I think I credit my previous CEO, Steve Reineman, with a lot of progress we made on diversity and inclusion because he said something profound. He said, you can't build an inclusion program if you don't have a critical mass of diversity. He said, look, if you have a small group of diverse people, how do you spread this message of inclusiveness, inclusivity across the company? So, step one is get a critical mass of diverse people and then build the inclusiveness platform over that, teach people how to practice inclusive behavior, be more thoughtful about what they say, and call them out when there's bad behavior. So, he put in place a scorecard which was parity hiring, parity promotion, parity retention. It was way ahead of its time, and everybody fought it, including me, saying, hey, we can't hire anybody because you've said parity. If there's four people we have to hire, two people have to be diverse. Can't find them. You say, go look harder. Okay? Remember, this was a white man who's saying, I don't care, guys. We either take this seriously or we don't talk about it at all. I think if we want to be a successful company, we're going to take it seriously. So we brought the diverse numbers into the company. And when we looked hard, we found them highly talented, diverse people. And then we put all the inclusion training. So people were sensitized to how they were behaving with diverse people, the kinds of unconscious behaviors that actually had a profound impact on diverse people of every kind. And so by layering on the inclusion training on a critical mass of diverse people, we could make progress. We could call out each other. Senior executives could call out bad behavior when they saw it. I honestly believe that diversity and inclusion cannot be delegated to one person like a DNI officer and say, I got a DNI officer, therefore I'm done. Diversity and inclusion has to be in the CEO's mandate. It's got to be in the senior executives' um, objectives. It's got to be a boardroom discussion if you want to take it seriously. An HR department should be held accountable for making sure that the behavior in the company supports inclusiveness, if you want. Yeah, inclusion, inclusive behavior. Yeah.
I recall that you mentioned, and I mean, I'm just stunned over here listening because I love how action oriented what you're saying is and how much accountability is in what you're saying. I recall you saying in another talk around, hey, the first time you share with somebody that this is not okay or the way you're interfacing is not okay, and you educate. The next time you might warn them. The third time is time to take action.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that can be what's missing in some of these initiatives. Like
Yeah.
where's the action? So I really appreciate you
And do
getting
it when
out
it happens. Don't wait for months or
right.
weeks because then everybody rewrites history or people forget. Do it when it happens. And if you don't do it, people around you should do it. People in power, if they see this behavior, should do it.
Thank you for calling that out. So let's talk about support. And I know that in your memoir and in this guide and this manual, you talk about your mother. And that really touched me because in your discussion about her, you talked about how her family didn't have the money to send her to college and to
Mhm.
further education, how she really wanted to support you girls and ensuring that you had this amazing education and all these opportunities. But she was also a little bit conflicted because there were all these social norms and cultural norms that were also associated with being a woman at that time. And so I'd love to know throughout your career, and again, throughout the book, you talk about your mom and your mom's support and how much that impacted your ability to move forward.
Well, I want to first give credit to my grandfather and my father too, because the men in our family believed that the women and men should be equally educated, should be allowed to dream as much as they wanted. There will be no discrimination against men and women. Now, again, put it in context. This is in the late 50s and early 60s in India, when India has just come out of British rule after 350 years of being ruled by the British. India is now an independent country. So I'm born 8 years after India was independent. So it's very, very early in the emergence of India. Society is conservative. My mother was brilliant, would have loved to have studied, but she wasn't given an opportunity because girls those days didn't go to college. They got married at 18 and were homemakers. So she lived her life vicariously through her daughters. But she also had to conform to the social norms, which said the daughters had to get married at age 18. So she had this foot on the brake, and the foot on the accelerator said, "Go off, dream big, do whatever you want." And my dad and my grandfather put their foot heavily on the accelerator and said, "Soar, not just dream big, soar. We'll provide the tailwinds for you." So this combination allowed us to have a little bit of a frame in our life. So we had discipline, we had rules, strict rules, which is a good thing, Laila. Which is a good thing. We had the support of family, we had that base, we had accountability, but we could also soar. We could dream big. And as long as we conformed within the frame, we could do what we wanted. And I think it's that combination of the brake and the accelerator that worked so well. And I would never ever fault my parents' foot on the brake, my mother's foot on the brake. It was the right thing to do because she had to survive in society too. And I love the fact that my mom, dad, and grandpa put a foot on the accelerator too because they believed in us. And I think today, in all families, they should look at men and women the same. Everybody should be educated. Everybody should be allowed to soar. Everybody should have responsibility for children and family creation, men and women alike. And I think, what was hard earned in those days should be a fact of life today.
I loved the parts where you talked about your grandfather and
Mm.
sitting at his feet and how he would have worksheets for you over and above what they had at school and how he made you read the newspaper thinking, making you think he couldn't read it, but he actually knew. He just
Yeah.
wanted to expose you to all of that. What a wonderful gift. I can't help but notice though, think about that, how, we're coming full circle, a multi-generational household. You had your grandfather, you had your mom and dad, and then I know you had cousins and things who would come at certain times because your house was fairly large. And I'm curious to know, as we bring that to now, right, and support systems, and as we started the conversation off, right, being people who have children, people who have elderly or parents who are growing old, how would you change the infrastructure to support that better now? Because certainly none of us could do what your mom did and also build a career, right? So I'm just curious to know what support systems and how you think that should change.
I think families are very important. However, you define family, Laila, it's a group of people coming together that care for each other. Okay, let me put it that way. Those are important infrastructures. You need that infrastructure to be able to have emotional connection with a group of people who care about you deeply. Okay, so we have to think about how to rebuild that infrastructure in our communities, in our little towns, wherever we can, we have to rebuild those. And all of those have to get rebuilt in civic centers and barber shops and libraries and park benches. We have to start trusting each other a bit more because in many places, we've all moved away from where our parents are.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have to recreate some version of family where we are. And there's got to be some intergenerational help. We have an aging population. How can the aging population serve as the role that my grandfather played in my family? It doesn't have to be a direct grandfather. It can be somebody who says, "Hey, for 2 days of the week, I'm going to read books to the young people in the park. Come on down, sit around me, and I'll read you a book." So it's the old days of recreating those social infrastructures so that we can actually come together as a society and help each other out at a point when we need more talent in the workforce. And women are just, doing so well in colleges, getting all the top degrees, top grades. Um, there are more 70% of high school valedictorians are women. We need that brain power to work in our economy, but we also need kids. So we need a whole ecosystem, a village, to help us be the support structure so that we can have families and also engage in paid work. It's an economic necessity to have women engaged in paid work. It's an economic necessity for young families to be created so that we can support the aging and we can provide people for all the jobs of the future. We know it's a double economic necessity. So let's view this, all of us, as economists and not just say this whole argument is a feminist argument. Okay, I'm all for equality, but this is an economic argument to say, let's provide a support structure. Let's think about how to rebuild trust in societies so that we can all help each other out. And let's figure out how to take away the stress on young family builders and women in particular so that they can play multiple roles that we ask of them.
I think that is something that is so incredibly needed. And I love that point of view of, hey, it's not just about gender or anything like that. It is about really what we need for the economy.
Right.
We'll go down to our next question, which is our last question before we open up to Q&A, because I know we've got a lot of folks who are like, I got a question. And that's really building on the comment you made about women, right? And women's support systems. And we'd be curious to know, how did you build kind of your network of women over time? And then how can women who are coming up now, right, who may or may not be as connected as they'd like to be, go about doing the same?
To be honest, when I was working, there weren't any women to connect with. So when I became CEO, I brought the other women CEOs and the budding CEOs together in my home, and we met a couple of times. And then one of the other CEOs said they'd take over the responsibility for the next meeting or two, and nothing happened because everybody was just too busy
Yeah.
doing their own thing. Um, but we need to have these support structures so we can call out each other when things go wrong. We can provide a support and a shoulder when things don't go so well. And I'm not sure we do a good job with that, Lyra. I'm not sure the sisterhood of women is as strong supporting each other as they could be. And I think we all need to open our eyes a lot more to say, are we open to advice from other women? Do we feel comfortable that it's good advice as opposed to saying, I'd rather take advice from a man than a woman? Are we open to it? Second, are we willing to trust other women who work with us, that each of us is worried about, are focused on the best interests of the person that's seeking the advice or you're giving them the advice? So I think that our sisterhood needs to mature a bit. And it's very, very important that we reach a point where, it's like there's trust. We don't judge each other, but help each other. And we also protect you. If you're subject to any sort of unconscious bias, we blow the whistle and say, hey, stop it. I notice this bad behavior. Let's make sure we stop it. As a group, we talk about it. And so I think our sisterhood is still in the early stages, but we need to get going fast.
Well, you have got me going. I will tell you that I am so excited, and I'm like nodding to everything that you're saying because it truly resonates with me. And I know it resonates with all of those who are listening. And to be able to have somebody who's accomplished as much as you have and has endured as much as you've had to endure, share this knowledge and these nuggets with us is just magical. It is absolutely magical. And I'm so grateful and appreciative of it.
Thank you, Lila. Thank you. It was such a pleasure to talk with you.
And so now we have an opportunity, Indra, to open it up for Q&A. And
Okay.
I am going to be the one who reads some of these questions that are coming in. So let's go ahead and queue up the first question. Okay. How did you break your deep-rooted Indian conditioning and expectations of balancing a family and husband, having a stronger career, and other cultural expectations? She's just shooting out she's ready to go. She wants to know.
The interesting thing is, I married somebody who believed that we are equal partners, absolutely equal partners. And it didn't matter which of the two of us was doing better or worse or going ahead or not. It didn't matter. We were equal partners. When we came into the house, we were both equal partners parenting our kids. And that was a commitment we made to each other when we got married. And what was more remarkable is his family also felt that way, which is very unusual. So I must say, I got the luck of the draw here. His family said, we ought to let Indra do whatever she wants to do. She needs to soar, let her soar. We'll support you guys. Don't worry about it. And even today, many of his old uncles and aunts would call and say, how's Indra doing? I've just finished chapter 4 of the book. I'm now in chapter 5. They send comments and questions. So it's very important that you marry the right person, because typically you end up getting married to somebody who doesn't want you to work or expects you to play a different role at home. It's not possible. If you want to soar, if you really want to have a career that moves ahead, you've got to have support at home. You've got to have less pressure at home. And you've got to have clear ground rules with your spouse as to equality in the marriage. I mean, you've got to support your spouse too at times. Don't get me wrong. There are times when he's gone for 6 months at a time when he was taking care of his father. I said, go. That's important. I'll take care of the household. Don't worry about it. I gave him no pressure. So I think you've got to have that understanding and you've got to approach it with equality. Very important. And then families have to commit to not giving you any added grief, especially in the Indian environment.
Thank you for that. I think that so often we all try to do it all. And without some of those balances and those checks that you talked about, it's very, very difficult. I recall you mentioning how you decided to get married to Raj and how it was quite different. But I won't be a spoiler. I'll let everybody else read the book.
Uh-huh.
But it was just very, very non-traditional and very,
True.
very interesting.
True. That's why
Okay.
we're still married.
Exactly, 40 years later. All right, we'll take the next question. Okay. How did you manage your time so effectively between your role, family, mentorships, and the entire spectrum? So, what did you do to go about prioritizing and getting things done?
First of all, the word effectively is an overstatement because I'm very honest in telling you that I was not the perfect mom, the perfect executive, perfect daughter, and I was not. I juggled through all of those. And at every point in time, um, somebody would remind me that I wasn't available here, I wasn't quite there. And, because the job needed me and I was responsible for so many people, I prioritized PepsiCo first because 260,000 employees were looking for the CEO to provide direction. And then between my husband and I, we somehow managed all of our other priorities and the extended family. The thing I'm envious about, Lila, is the technology that we have today. If I'd had all of these teleconferencing technologies, FaceTime, the chat, the talks. Can you imagine? I could have actually gone home at 3:30. I could have spent time with the kids, taken the kids off the bus, and then continued working from home. I need not have traveled as much as I did. I was on the plane all the time. I need not have done that because I could have done a lot of meetings through these technology tools. Okay. So, in a way, I wish all of this technology had been available when I was a CEO. Or maybe even when I was president, because that's when I had to travel a lot. My kids were even smaller, because I could have spent a lot more time with them. And so I would say to all of the young people today, take these technology and the tools that you have as a gift and figure out how to engineer a support structure around this. And I am a bad example of a person that traveled all the time, was in the office all the time, because I had no choice. You have the benefit of fantastic technology tools that are only going to get better. If Google has its way, you're going to make things way better than they are today. I have great confidence in your company. All right. So, and the only key thing is, here's a request. You should tell your Google leaders, put family and women in the center when you're developing these tools, so that you make it easier for them to build young families and for women to not have to take a disproportionate share of the workload. Put families and women in the center of technology development. I think magic could happen.
Amen on this side on that one. That is absolutely something that I mentioned earlier is near and dear to my heart. So thank you for mentioning that. It's interesting. I also had a chance to meet with some women, and we were talking about wanting to aspire to roles like yours and to be just a little bit of what you've accomplished, and how we were like, hey, we don't know if we can do it the way they did it. And I love that you mentioned that we don't have to. It's a completely different world, and there's so many more options. So there's no need to be afraid to raise your hand to do more. So thanks for
The skill that we have, everybody has to learn, Lila, is lifelong learning. I think technology is changing so rapidly around us, thanks to companies like Google, that everybody has to become a lifelong student to keep up with the changing technology. Because if you don't remain a lifelong student and let the technology get ahead of you, you're going to fall behind. So keep in mind that as you move up that pyramid, especially those in managerial positions, when you move up the pyramid, you're either up or out. And so you've got to keep up with all of those changes to remain current, to remain relevant. And just be prepared for all that. Look, it's a fantastic journey. You feel great. You're on an intellectual high, but don't get on a physical low. Use all the technologies to your advantage, and you can do it. Seriously, you can do it.
I also love that you mentioned that it doesn't have to be perfect. You weren't efficient at every single role all the
No.
time. I often say progress, not perfection. A lot of times we think that we have to be perfect at everything. And you mentioning that just proves that no, we don't, right? You have to prioritize and do the best you can, right? In the
Well, the
different areas.
problem is we all have a perfection gene. It's programmed in us. And so that keeps coming out and, sort of bugging us at times. But we've got to just start living life the way we want to and say, look, this is the best we can do, and use all the tools available around us, and create the support structures when they don't exist. We can do it.
Wonderful. Okay, let's go to the next question. Women who are first in their profession often have to rethink cultural narratives. What advice did you receive from family or friends that you realized in hindsight was a blessing to ignore? Good question.
Look, had I stayed in India, okay, there's a whole different set of things that I could have stayed with or changed, okay, because that would have been a culture I grew up in, and a culture that, I was familiar with. But coming to the US, I had to decide which of my cultural narratives should I keep, which ones should I modify, and which ones should I completely give up to integrate. Because I've come to a different culture, there has to be some integration, right? So, I grew up as a vegetarian. I don't smoke, I don't drink. All of those I kept. And, I lead a pretty simple life, a good life. All of those I kept. But I also integrated. I love American sports. I love football. I love baseball. I'm into it in a big way. I love music, American music. I'm into everything, country music, blues, rock and roll, pop. I'm into everything. Does that mean I gave up anything from my Indian roots and culture? No. I just kept the best of that, and took on the most exciting parts of the culture here, the innovation, the entrepreneurship here, the incredible sense of can do spirit that exists in the United States. All of those I learned from, and I'm better for it. That's why I came here. That's what excited me about the US. And I always say one thing, Laila, my story can only have happened in the United States, only in America. Let's not forget that. And so it can't happen with me trying to change everybody around me to accept me for who I was. I kept the best of who I was and took on the best of what I found here. And I am a great blend of the two. That's why I talk about my duality.
Wow. It's interesting just letting that sink in on how helpful that is, right? When people are trying to make those decisions and kind of going back and forth. I also know from your book that you're a huge fan of cricket as well, and don't you serve on some of those teams even now?
You can't walk away from them. I mean, those are all things that you grew up with. It's in your blood. Yeah.
I think we might have time for one more question. All right, this will be our last question. Did you ever actively plan and work towards becoming CEO? And what was that thought process?
Absolutely not. Did not actively plan and work towards being CEO. Had I done that, I would not have been CEO.
Yeah, interesting.
I think focus on the job you're doing very, very well. Put the company before you and look and see how your job interacts with everything else around you. And understand the politics, but don't play the politics. And invest in communication skills. Let me bring it all the way back to that. Invest in communication skills. Project yourself based on your competence, nothing else. And everything else takes care of itself. But if you sit here going, okay, I drew a 10-year plan, I've got to be senior executive by year 8, I've got to be CEO by year 15, ain't going to work. Because if it doesn't happen on that schedule, that's all you worry about all the time. Don't do that. It's not worth it.
And so I think we're wrapping up. Indra, thank you again for this amazing conversation. It has had a huge impact on me, and getting to know you through your book is definitely one of the highlights for me. I'm so grateful for that. And in true Oprah Winfrey style, if you're okay with it, I'd like to maybe end with one last question. And that is, what is one thing you know for sure?
The one thing I know for sure is that women represent the single biggest opportunity in our country for growth, for elevating this country's economic growth in every which way. Women represent the single biggest opportunity. Somebody said, women are our single biggest emerging opportunity in the country. I firmly believe that. And I think the time has come to unleash the potential of this incredible group of people that we call women.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thanks again for being here. Thank you for the inspiration. Thank you for the advice and the very direct communication style.
Thank you, Lila. It was a pleasure and a privilege chatting with you. Thank you.
You're welcome.